Hey everyone, Adam Kanakin here with ILET Network for another Tactical Breakdown podcast episode. With me today, Andy Wrenn, the head of training for Axon. Andy, thanks so much for joining me, brother.
Adam, thanks for having me, man. Really pumped to be on here and talking to you.
I was very lucky. I ran into Scott, who's a new member of the Axon training team, at the Force Science Conference earlier this year, and we got to have some really interesting conversations. I shared my my hesitancy to work with organizations like Axon just because of some of the history in the past, and the directions that the company as a whole has taken. But I was pleasantly surprised after speaking with Scott and then having the opportunity to speak with you on a few occasions and really understand that your entire training team and department that is now stood up with Axon is really leaning in the right direction. And I'm so excited for it because you guys have a very large market share, especially in the law enforcement and public safety space. And I think you have the ability to make some really positive changes, not just for our community, but the world as a whole. So man, I'm excited to have you here to talk about what you guys are doing and to see what kind of rabbit hole we jump down. So where should we start? I want to actually do this before we kick this off. Can you give me the quick 30-second of your background so that people understand kind of where you came from before you joined with Axon?
Yeah, sure. So I started my journey as a young guy chasing my big brother into the fire department when I was 16 years old. And 7 years in the fire service led me to building these phenomenal mentoring relationships with cops and deputies, where I grew up. And then when I went to school, and they really started my trajectory in being interested in law enforcement and what they do and their mission and how they work. And I just remember, the first deputy, a guy named Joe Stipe, when I was a residential firefighter in a little town of Summerfield, North Carolina. And I remember going on my first ride along, and Joe was just so incredibly impactful to me personally, just as such a good person, and was helping me understand and learn about law enforcement in the United States. And just remember thinking, wow, they give you guys a gun and a radio and a car, and they sit you off into the world, and you go solve all these really complex problems. And that was the hook for me. And so, at 23 years old, I entered policing at the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, where 15th largest city in the U.S., about 2,000 cops, and started my law enforcement journey at 23 there, and got to work with some of the most phenomenal people that really helped me build who I was, who I wanted to be, where I wanted to go in life, and that was it. CMPD was about a 14-year career. What I did there, obviously starting in patrol like most everybody does, and we were big enough to have the benefit of decentralized operations, meaning that most of the heavy investigative, violent crime investigative stuff happened out of headquarters. But then we started doing, like things like beyond street level investigation into robbery, property crimes, like that kind of stuff, and then even decentralizing high risk warrant. So we have a phenomenal SWAT team in Charlotte, so those guys really took care of patrol people, taught us phenomenal skills, from basic stuff like clearing houses, how the stack works, weapons handling, phenomenal stuff. So did a bunch of that in patrol for about 10 years, a few different jobs on the investigative side, community side, traffic, and then really got very interested in the police academy and helping teach there. I had a martial arts background growing up, and so I was very interested in police use of force and what we were doing. And we never had one singular program. We had a mixed martial arts program, so I brought a little bit of Aikido to that program, and started teaching as an adjunct, and then ended up coming to the academy full time as an instructor. And use of force was the area I lived in: police and custody death, why we do what we do, how we do it, how we can get better. And in that micro journey at the academy, I also owned the Taser program. And so the owning the Taser program there meant that not only we taught all of our folks at CMPD, I taught some surrounding agencies, and then got recruited into Taser to start teaching across the country. for instructor schools, master instructor schools, and that kind of stuff. And so that was back in 2010, 2011, and got to know Rick Smith, the CEO of Axon, when the company was still Taser International, and at a a long time ago. And Taser recruited me in to start helping with their programs and selling their programs in 2012. So that's how I got here.
That's a cool story, and the reason why is because I love to, and everybody who listens to this podcast knows that I love to figure out the why behind things, and so finding out with instructors like your background, your history, and then also too, I think the unsung part of your story is the fact that you started in fire, right? Probably fire EMS, and that now carries into policing, which carries into your new role with Axon. And that knowledge, that outside of the bubble thinking that you usually get from having multiple different types of careers, is what I feel really helps drive great instructors is being able to contextualize things in different ways for different people. So I love the background and the story on that. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's I used to get so much shit from all the cops when I started working. As we go to car crashes and medical calls and stuff, and I'm grabbing lines and starting out like getting IVs prep for the paramedics, and the cops are like, "Dude, what are you doing?" Like we don't do that in police work. And there's even a guy that there was a real bad crash one time. He was tractor trailer rolled over, pinned him in. He was starting to burn inside, and as soon as the engine company got there, I pulled an attack line and started working. And all the cops were like, always thought that was funny to me, but Adam, for me, life, there's so much cool shit you can learn. And if we stop learning, I think we get in trouble. So I've always been a sponge in that regard. I love to just learn new things and skills, and apply that to whatever I'm doing.
Well, I think that's a great way to segue into this TaserCon conference that's taking place in January in Vegas. One, I mean, and for those of you who don't know, this will be the first chance that I've gotten to share with everyone that I've been very lucky that working with your team, I'm going to get to come down there and work with you guys and work with your first responder network, which is something new that's going on, obviously, and getting some of that training in there and getting some more interviews done with those subject matter experts that are down there. And it was really interesting to me with TaserCon because the when I first heard about it, I was like, okay, what is a taser training conference? What is this? And then you go in there and you start seeing the experts that you guys are bringing in and the types of training that you're bringing in, and it's not what people think it is.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that I'd love to talk about and pick your brain about because when you put this thing together, it wasn't about use of force and less lethal training utilizing tasers, right? That wasn't the focus. So can you explain a bit about what the core method and the core idea behind this TaserCon event is?
Yeah. So just to give a little bit more about my journey here at Axon, I entered the company in 2012 and sold for 8 years. So I sold across all of our platforms and software, and then led a sales team in 2020. Luke Larson, who just took leave, was our president at 2020 at the time. He called me one day in September of 2020, and he said, "We have got to invest more in training. It feels like it has just been kind of a check the box experience for a while, and we need to figure out what that is, and how to resource it better." And so in that journey, trying to build up what we're doing now and what we're going to do in the future, I started to look around the country and try to understand, like, because I'd been out of law enforcement training for quite a while. Although I was still a reserve officer at CMPD, I didn't have the like 30,000 foot view of like what was going on anymore.
Mhm.
And so I started to look around, like who was doing what. And so you got, obviously, a lot of different law enforcement conferences, but they tend to focus on like a few specific things. Like, you got phenomenal people out there, like NTOA does some really, really cool stuff. CIT, very specifically focused. And then we came across ILETA, and there's a few more in there, but we came across ILETA that seemed to have the most broad range. And I think what ILETA does well is they fulfill a very tactical need for instructors. Like, I need these certifications. I want to learn about this. But it also felt a little more on the skills in tools side. And I'm like, just for me, I was like, who's talking about the human side right now? who has a conference for public safety, so that could, because we know hospital security and private security, there are armed people that are former police and military in those spaces. Those spaces are very, very important. Who's talking about this for public safety? The human factor side, like when we use force, what's happening? How can we start vectoring resources to that? Like, who's talking about this? And I couldn't find anyone who was doing this um, as a focus. And so immediately, TaserCon wasn't the name that I had, but it was really, uh, the idea was I wanted to make a very human experience,
Mhm.
to tackle like some of the not cute shit, right? Some of the stuff that's really tough on the profession right now, just coming out of the last 36 months, man, law enforcement's, I would argue, been in quite a crisis. Um, Recruiting is down 30-40% across the domestic space anyway. Like, I remember at CMPD, we'd have 2 to 3,000 people in line to come into the police academy, and I think we're sub 1,000 now, right? So I think we're seeing that across the country. We've got one of our senior masters, Leroy Outlaw, is a Seattle officer. They're supposed to be 1,600 sworn. They're below 9 and expecting to exit the year with below 700 officers. They're pulling detectives out of bureaus to answer 911 calls. Like, there's a lot of that going on. I know Seattle's got a little bit more special of a story because of some of the politics out there. And then like depression and burnout, these are very, very real things. All this is negatively impacting the decisions that these officers are making on the street. And then the other side is, who is there? Who is there for police officers? Like, everybody has a EAP and city or county or state resources, but man, going through a critical experience and talking to somebody that's never been in a patrol car, that's not cool. That's not fun. And that's mostly what's available to officers now. So, how do we take all of these things and start having dynamic conversations about changing those outcomes? And the outcome is, when they use force, they have clarity, they're well prepared. We get rid as much cognitive challenge or lockup as we can. And like this ongoing thing, I remember I used to get in arguments when my chain of command at the academy on cutting training. And we know, like, it's no secret, it's the most litigious environment in law enforcement. It's the number one thing that cops get, or police agencies get sued for, is failure to train. Yet it consistently seems to be on the chopping block first when it comes to public safety budgets. I've never fully understood that. Um, but these are just areas we wanted to dig into, Adam, and we thought we could develop just this very human focused conference to bring some of these things to light. And this is leveraging the phenomenal partnerships like yours to help us talk about these things. Axon is not righteous in this space. I just want to make that clear. We just think we have a good platform to launch a conference like this off of.
Well, and that's why I was so excited. I mean, obviously, for everybody who's attended ILET stuff before, they know mental health and that whole realm, physical, mental, everything as far as officers go, is a and first responders is a big part of what we do. We have the I Got Your Six program. We donate all of our profit from our events to charity, whether it's Copline or Blue Help or others. And when you had told me that, like, this is our core focus, it's to get back into, let's talk about officers as human beings and what we can do to help them. And I love that concept, and it was a really eye-opening for me because in the past, like I had said, that wasn't the feeling I got from Axon as a whole, previously Taser as a whole. And when you said, like, this is where our direction is moving forward, that's when I was like, all right, I'm happy to support this. I'm happy to be involved with this because it is so in line with what we do. Um, and when I looked at your list of instructors, you're like, yeah, we're looking at having these folks. I'm like, we work with those folks already, so I know the quality that you're going to have there is top level, and that's why it was really cool. So, um, what can people expect when they come down to this conference? So it's going to be in Vegas. It's actually right. It's right before Shot Show, I
It's
believe.
the
Right,
week
it's
week
the week before,
following. So
week
we
following
start.
Shot Show.
Yeah, so we start Monday. I think SHOT Show ends either Saturday or Sunday. So yeah, like if you're traveling, if you're planning on travel for SHOT Show, you can like for one flight, one round trip flight, you actually get 2 conferences under your belt if you're interested in that. But roll right out of SHOT Show into us. It actually worked out really nicely because obviously SHOT Show really well attended. A lot of police trainers and range guys and gun guys and weapons people go to SHOT Show, and so it's a lot about what we're talking about is the use of those things kind of in the field. So yeah,
Yeah.
we're right after SHOT Show in Vegas at MGM.
So what can people expect with the conference? Like
Yeah,
what's the layout? What can they expect when they sign up and register for this thing?
yeah, great question. So tasercon.com should give you a sense of like what this is going to feel like. We're going to tackle some tough stuff, right? So we're going to tackle officer suicide, wellness and vitality, depression, burnout, all that stuff. But we're also going to tackle some really cool stuff. So that's the hard stuff. We got to talk about it. There's some really neat stuff like we're going to have some of our friends from the FBI do an update on Leoka. That's I'll talk about that a little bit later. That's phenomenal research and information that's coming out of their shop. We've actually got like some other experiences like Robbie Robertson's coming from the North Carolina Highway Patrol to talk about. It's a course called the First 3 Seconds. It's one of the most phenomenal training experience I've ever had, and it's really how you can visually detect pre attack and ambush indicators by suspects that you're out with. And it taught me a ton about people, just safety pats on the pockets and people that do, some of these guys are doing this stuff subconsciously. And if we train the troopers, deputies, and police officers how to pick up on those cues, we can start saving more lives. So that's one like I continue to be super excited about. And then we've got Maureen McGough, who's coming to talk about her platform, which is 30 by 30, and her initiative to get more more women into law enforcement. I think it's 4 or 5% right now. She's got a goal to get, to increase that substantially, especially in police leadership. So she's really got some cool and dynamic stuff. So we're kind of touching a range of different experiences covering, essentially human performance, human factors, how to communicate effectively or better, and some leadership stuff. Colonel Tom Gordon from the Marines, who commands the Citadel now, he's coming to talk about a book he wrote, which is essentially the best and worst leadership lessons he learned in his Marine Corps career. So we've got what I think is just a phenomenally well-rounded human experience at this event, and so pretty pumped. So the biggest thing I want to say is like if you've been to an Axon event, either IECP or Accelerate, which is our tech forward experience, there's a lot of energy, a lot of fun. TASERCon is going to be that, right? We're talking about heavy and serious things, but we also want people to have fun. And, you've been in education and training for a long time, Adam. So, if like people are, if we're satisfying that enjoyment side of them, people are just going to be more spongy and going to want to learn about a lot of stuff, even outside of their wheelhouse.
Yeah, and with conferences like this, I always say, and ILETA, you brought up. I mean, ILETA is one of the organizations that we've supported from the very beginning. I've been an ILETA member since 2011. They're a phenomenal. Recommend that any instructor is a part of that organization. I say that every single time.
Yeah.
But what commonly gets brought up at ILETA is that what you take away most from that conference takes place after the actual day is over, the training is done, and it's the conversations you have in the hallways, it's the conversations you have over dinner and out over drinks. And I really feel, especially looking at the cadre of instructors you've assembled, and I know the folks that are going to be there, that is what I really feel a key takeaway from this experience is going to be for people, right? It's not just, hey, what did we learn in class today? It's what relationships can we build, because you guys are bringing in some heavy hitters that, like you had said, are across the country in the U.S. And I think that's really cool to see. So I'm excited for that part, especially is the relationship building component of it.
Oh man, no doubt. I remember. So my first experience at Master Instructor School with Taser at the time was phenomenal because that networking part is so dang important. Matter of fact, the one of the best threat recognition drills that I'd ever seen, and we brought it back to CMPD in our training, was taught to me by a guy named John Rose out of Ohio, and we've recruited John back into our senior master space because he's just a phenomenal law enforcement leader and instructor. But I mean, you walk away from those experiences to your point, and if you haven't learned something or met someone that can help you forward a program or give you a new skill or something to take back, like that's lost time. And so we want to take advantage of that at TaserCon. We've got a phenomenal Monday night kickoff event that you do not want to miss. Super super fun. We've got keynotes on every day. We've got you know Paul Butler, who's going to come. He's going to be our featured keynote speaker on Thursday, which is the last day of the conference. And if you don't know Paul, I would look him up. He is, I would describe him as one of the most infectious and influential leaders in the law enforcement space today. Just a phenomenal guy, and he just gets rave reviews, and he cares. He's been in the profession, spent 30 plus years in the profession operationally. So it's not like this guy's just a random personality who's great to be around. Like he knows the job, and he's investing in us, and we're so proud to have him with us for that week. But pretty fun experiences around TaserCon.
Yeah, I mean, everyone who's familiar with ILET knows my love for Paul. He's spoken at our events previously. He's going to be speaking at this year's ILET Summit in December. And to your point, it's even online when we do our virtual things with him, it's enthralling the way he speaks and presents. It's his cadence, his tone, the verbiage he uses. Obviously, he has that soft, sweet Southern accent. But when he's in live in person, it's one of the most captivating keynotes that you'll get. And there's a handful of people, and I won't list them off, but there's about a handful of people in the law enforcement training space right now that demand like from the very start of their presentation to the end, where you're just fixed in to them as a speaker, and he's one of those people. So you guys couldn't have picked a better person, I think, to be involved with that. Obviously, we also have guys like Rob Chadwick,
Mhm.
who's part of ILET, who's also a master instructor for Axon as well. So that's really cool to find all these synergies that we have together, which was another part of those initial conversations that we had. It was kind of like, oh, you know that person too, and oh, like there was a lot of stuff, and it's like, well, why aren't we working together already? So
Yeah,
that was kind of neat.
yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Rob, so I got to talk about Scott and Rob. Is I don't know about the Canadian space, but with in the local law enforcement space in the U.S., we give the FBI's a ton of shit. The FBI guys, like we give them a ton of crap, and so one of the reasons I picked Scott Rotman to essentially be our director of policy and training strategy was because his global outreach in that job was just incredible. So for those of you who don't know Scott Rodman, Scott was the executive, like the section chief over global training for the FBI before he retired. Just a year and a half ago or so, and he touched 12,000 agents across the globe. Had to build and rebuild a whole instructor network, and that was just the last job he had. He was an ASAC in Miami. He most of his job at the FBI, or I'd say a large part of his job at the FBI, was running local task forces. So he ran ours in Charlotte for. We had a team called VCAT here. Is all they do is violent crime stuff. So they essentially are the operational controls for the local FBI office to go get the real bad guys. Scott ran that team, right? And so he was so well connected in his military background too, so well connected into the local law enforcement pulse, and he was just such a great fit organically for our company and where we wanted to grow and what we wanted to do. And then obviously, naturally, Rob worked for him running the FBI's tactical program across the globe, and a phenomenal talent. He is taking some of our curriculum, especially some of the new directions we're going, everything he touches is exponentially larger than what it was when he got it. So he's making some huge impacts to our organization as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I mean, that's always the question, right? Is how well do the local and state agencies match up with the federal entities, and where's the respect level there and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny because every once in a while you'll find the outliers, the people that transcend any of the bullshit, that they're high performers, and everyone just knows like, hey, this person is just going to produce gold. And that's what, whether it's through training or through operational effectiveness, and it's really cool that you guys honed in on a few of those folks that are definitely able to do that. So excited. And again, too, it goes into this whole thing where you said we want to push training, right? And you're putting your money where your mouth is. That's for sure. Bringing guys like that in. So I want to shift focus a bit too, and I want to start talking about this new training direction for Axon. Because that's something that I think a lot of people they may not know about, or if they do, maybe they have um, some ideas that may not align with where you're actually headed. So, can you break down that division of Axon specifically, and what it is that you're looking to try to accomplish?
Yeah. When when I took over in January of 2021, my first, I'd been out of that training space for a while as far as tasers went, and we'd had some challenges with leadership in the past on like vision and execution and what we should be doing and why we should be doing it, and it kind of went back and forth for a while. And the overall outcome when I came into this group was that we had gotten to a point where I would honestly say our training felt watered down. It felt like we were checking the box for certification so agencies could deploy their programs. And for me, we fulfilled a need, but that's just not good enough. Like, if we are responsible globally for empowering instructors and master instructors to deploy programs and train human beings on how to do these things, we should be dumping as much resource as we have into that experience. And let's be candid, man. Like, the taser is the most used force option in the United States of America. And I'm not obsoleting that from the international market like Canada, Latin America, APAC, EMEA, but for the US, we're number one. And so that comes with, candidly, an obligation to our customers and to the community they serve to give training as much resource as it actually needs, because the outcome is what we want, right? The instructors and master instructors, the investment we make in them is because of the most important person in the stack, and that's the cop. The cop on the street is that's our number one focus. That's our customer, right? If that makes sense. If we're not connecting those dots in between us and them, we failed. So here's an example. I would go into agencies, Adam, and this still happens today. And by the way, if you're one of these agencies, I am not discounting your desire to develop and execute on great programs, because I know you're under duress and budgets are an issue and all these things. But the reality is, we've got cops on annual certification shooting a taser into a cardboard target that's not moving, right? So if we take that experience and that's their training, and we push that out to the street where there's critical decision making, there's a ton of stress, there's dynamic movement, there's threat recognition, threat mitigation. All those things are required to use force, and we're not doing that in the training environment. How can we expect them to succeed? How could you train them by shooting two targets into a fixed target and expect them to do something different in the street? The math just doesn't add up. And so we had to be, as an organization, we're a part of that. Like, we had to be stronger about what our expectations were of our master instructors and instructors. And ultimately, yeah, it's on them to deliver training to their cops and their departments. But the reality is, as a manufacturer of the weapon, if we don't set an expectation for the environment that they should be training in, equaling to an outcome that they want to see, we have failed them. And that was an area we needed to grow. So we changed that manufacturer recommendation. Finally got it through legal, and it took a little bit of time, but finally got that changed to last year. And again, it's simple: train in the environment you operate in. Simple. And even if you're a guy or girl that runs a taser program, you got like 10 officers, and you got a building that you can only use sometimes, we can always find a way to get stress up through exercise. We can always find a way to effectively challenge critical decision making with limited resources, and we're always available. Like, call me, email me. I will help you do anything to succeed at any point in time. And my team is absolutely committed to helping anyone succeed. So that was just an area, like, I'm like, we've got to change the direction of what we're doing so people recognize what we're doing, what we're recommending, and the reason why. The reason why is the most important part. And the outcomes, man. We got to help agencies get to a higher level of outcomes within their communities. And that's first holding us accountable, and then making sure anyone who comes through our certification courses are also, they're accountable for what they're doing as well. And so, for example, like instructor courses, we typically just teach on one platform and talk about nomenclature and theory and put them through some live fire, but we weren't doing reality based training. So how can we expect an instructor level person on a taser to go deliver reality based training if they don't already have those skills to their agency? So we wanted to be a part of that story. So those are things that we're doing on that side. On the human factor side, look, we have had some great challenges by partners like you. There's a fellow named Paul Taylor out of University of Denver. Paul,
I know Paul
uh,
very well. Yep.
yeah, man. Paul's like, hey, you guys aren't doing enough. We're like, oh, tell me more. That I don't. If anybody comes to us and says, hey, I don't like what you're doing, or you're not doing enough, or like whatever, that's sponginess for me. Tell me more. I want to know more about that. Because again, we aren't righteous, man. We're on a journey. The journey is how can we continue to evolve, and how can we continue to empower our customers to win. And so we latch right on to Paul. We're like, hey, you're in the human factors business. He's a former cop. He understands use of force and critical decision making, applying human factors. Help us continue to grow here. And he's now going to be sitting on our training advisory board. So we're pretty pumped about that. And then there's this other stuff like, that's all the taser and growing on the use of force and critical decision making side. But we're also like looking around the country and going, like, what resources do police officers have when they get into really, really bad situations? And how do they deal with those situations? We're horrible about talking about these things and talking to each other. And so we started a program called Axon Coaching as well. And this is peer to peer, cop to cop, not within your agency. You can just come out and spill the beans and talk from anything from nutrition to fitness to depression to I just had a really shitty day and need to talk to somebody that also sits in a patrol car and identify with them. For me personally, with one of my incidents, I didn't start growing until I talked to somebody that was outside my agency and was not like some kind of psychologist or shrink or someone in EAP, because that is, although EAP programs are great, they're not really built for what we do, right? They're just typically supported and resourced with really well-intended people and good people and smart people, but they've never actually been in a use of force or shooting or in a police car or seen somebody burn a lot. Like, they just don't, they can't identify with that stuff. And so for people to kind of heal in this profession, we felt like that was the direction we wanted to test the waters in.
Absolutely. I've so many things that you touched on there, that I want to kind of dive into. First one, I will. Obviously, Paul Taylor. Paul's presented at ILET before. He was actually, so this was an interesting conversation. We did a roundtable after the Kim Potter incident. And so, for those of you who aren't familiar, obviously the Kim Potter incident was a weapons confusion incident in which she drew her firearm instead of her taser and shot a suspect, who ended up dying of their injuries. And it went to court. She was actually found guilty, and is currently serving a sentence. Um, we're not here to argue or debate that and all of those things, but in that roundtable, Paul was part of that, and obviously there was a few other folks. I actually had the opportunity to speak with Mike Brave prior to us going on the roundtable, and for those of you who don't know, Mike Brave has been, connected with Axon, and your legal team for a very long time. Is probably one of the foremost experts in use of force in North America, if not
Yeah.
definitely in North American law. And so it was really interesting because Paul did bring up a few key points, and I'm assuming they're the same points that he's spoken with you directly about, in regards to taser design, and all of those different types of things when it comes to weapon confusion. Which is, again, it's so interesting to me because everybody comes at these things from a different perspective, right? So you either come at it from an academics perspective, an operational perspective, you come at it from a training perspective, And when you start shifting the viewpoint, things get messy real quickly, because you think you have 100% of a solution here in my lane, and then I take a step to the right, and then you start seeing a bunch of issues, and then
Mhm.
you know what I mean. And so I'm super excited that, because Paul has been a very vocal person when it comes to criticizing certain aspects of Taser, and the fact that you're willing to say that is the information we need. It's there's nothing more frustrating in my experience than building a group of people that'll literally sit around and circle jerk each other because they all agree on the same idea.
Yeah.
You get nowhere with it. You get absolutely nowhere with it. And so by bringing in dissenting opinions, other perspectives, I really feel that you guys are set up for an amazing progression with your program. Because, and not to say that Paul's going to be the end all and be all of that, that's what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that having those people to bounce things off of is massively important, and I'm so excited to because this is the first I've heard of it right here live. So that's really cool that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, again, when I came into the role, I went to our first training advisory board meeting, and this we do these quarterly, and it's made up historically of senior master instructors who wanted to elevate and continue doing more with the company. We do obviously curriculum writing, review. We do product voice of customer stuff for all the product teams. So the tab is what we nickname it, has done some pretty cool stuff, but it also felt like that when I first started. It felt like a sounding board. It felt like everybody was in alignment, and for me, that's a signal that something is wrong. And so we've been recrafting the tab. Now we've got federal law enforcement in there. So, some of the FBI and other agencies grabbing guys like Paul Taylor. We're actually we're dipping into the private sector. So we wanted to talk about tactical athletics. We wanted to talk about human factors in professional and
Mhm.
college sports, human factors. And so we found this guy who's phenomenal. His name is Tesh Rao. He's the assistant athletic director at ASU. And Tesh has got a really interesting story. Career Navy pilot, Top Gun school, like 240 combat missions or something between Afghanistan and Iraq, flew F-18s, rolls out, goes to Starbucks, works directly for Howard Schultz. All he does is corporate partnerships, and then goes to ASU and is in this human performance side. And so we're like, oh man, what can we learn from athletics to pull into our
Mhm.
world in the world of public safety? Because the way I think about this, Adam, if you think about all of the resources that college athletics and professional athletics get, mental, physical coaches, kinesiology, nutrition, sports nutrition, performance nutrition, all that shit, why can't cops have access to that? There's no reason. The only reason is money. And so if we look at that and we're like, okay, so how can we figure out how to do this? And if it costs, internal resources to get this done, that's okay, because again, we're in search of the outcomes. So if we have a platform of delivery on the human factor side that is, you know, human performance side, excuse me, that is, helpful to our core group, our rabid fan base, what does that do? Right? How does that impact law enforcement? So this is all stuff we're like unpacking. You guys are we're going through this like change right now. I'm so pumped about it because every time we get in someone from outside our space, like core space, it's good that it causes a debate in a tab meeting now versus like the echo chamber. That's progress to me. So pretty pumped about that.
Yeah, man. So I was looking up. It's funny you said that. For those that have listened to the podcast since we started in 2019, there's probably a few podcasts in there where I did with a friend of mine, Lon Bartel, who's the director of training and curriculum for Vertra. And we were talking years ago about how frustrating it is that we have professional sports bodies and teams that spend billions of dollars on optimizing human performance in sport, and all of the information and knowledge exists, and we use absolutely none of it when it comes to training first responders.
Yeah.
It's it's so sad, it's funny if you think about it, right? We still have we still have people that run programs and they have PT programs that is cut and paste from the 80s, and they go, well, why do we do this? Well, we do it because we've always done it that way. Yeah, but why? What was the reason behind it? What are the limitations of it? What could we do better? Right? Hey, listen, if you want to get all the troops up for a 4 a.m. 4:30 PT call and go run 15 miles for no other reason than to just beast them, rock and roll. But don't tell me it's to train them to be better runners, because that's not what it is at all.
Yeah.
So we have to differentiate the reasons why we do certain types of athletic training and performance training, but understand the why behind it. And I think what you just said is hypercritical. Understanding sports and performance from the athletic side, here's how the human body is going to work, regardless of if you're in a firefight or if you're in an NBA finals game, right? It doesn't matter. The human body is the human body, right? And so, what can we learn and how can we optimize that for what we're using? The information is out there. The problem is that a lot of instructors have a hard time contextualizing the information into their training delivery because they just don't have the experience in doing that, right? It's
Yeah.
that human performance blended with adult learning principles that is very difficult for a lot of people. There's a lot of really cool programs out there right now. The absolute best example, and remind me afterwards, we'll touch base on this, but Chris Butler, who is a former inspector with the Calgary Police Service up here in Canada, is also an instructor with For Science, developed a methods of instruction program um, specifically for physical skills and training that For Science is utilizing in the United States, and Chris is teaching internationally, and has been picked up by a lot of agencies up here in Canada specifically. But it talks about that very specific concept, which is how do we as instructors contextualize information from one realm of performance and use it so that the officer understands how to implement that and utilize it in their day to day, right? Which is a really difficult thing to do. So it's really cool that you're saying that you guys are going to be try to be at the forefront of that push.
Yeah. So here's the way I think about it, man. I'm like, okay. Yeah, and I'm just going to use North Carolina for an example. To be a barber in a basic certification in North Carolina, it's like 1,530 hours or something like that, right? Just to be a barber. And I'm not negating the value of that job, right? Like I love getting a haircut just like everybody else does. And I know there's health and safety involved in all that stuff. But to be a basic certified, BLET certified police officer in the state of North Carolina, it's around 650 hours or something like that, I believe. So if we're saying, which we are as a society, we're saying, okay, we expect you, police, public safety, to do miraculous things in seconds, and we're going to give you a third of what of training and preparation that we do a barber. Don't we have a bigger problem? In the bigger problem, then our society's expectation of how resources should be allocated. Because it's not till the 3 p.m. news cycle that everybody goes, whoa, 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 why are the cops doing this? What has happened? Even in Kim Potter case, my first question wasn't, why did she do what she did? My first question was like, what training did she have?
Mhm.
That was my first question. How did they prepare her or anyone else for that matter to be able to escape a situation like that and not have used the wrong weapon? And so I think about this big kind of circle, right? We, especially in the states, we elect people to represent us in our communities, in our states, in our federal government. Those people write and craft legislation that gets enacted on. That certification for law enforcement is legislatively controlled through the state of North Carolina. And so, isn't it the people in our communities that have a fair ownership in the success of what we give officers to enter the street with? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, if that's not going to change, and we can march, you know, up to Washington D.C. and do a ton of work, and it'll take us decades to change these kind of things, if you wanted to call it national police reform or whatever. Or how do we move faster, private enterprise? How do we move faster and give agencies more resources to actually start cutting off some of these things and helping their officers train at a higher level that they've ever trained. So how do we do that? Using technology, human beings, and other platforms to essentially create efficiencies in learning. Like VR is a huge one, right? That accelerated learning model is something we're heavily invested in and really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm excited for it too. I think you're right. I think and this is a discussion we've had internally. It's discussions we've had openly on different platforms before. The push to change the culture of training in our space right now, the biggest inroads are going to be made through private enterprise. I think you're 100% correct on that, because we have the flexibility and the ability to make changes and make them quickly. We can, and I've had this conversation with people. The reason what makes ILET so different from everybody else is I get to decide if I want to change everything on a dime and tomorrow go a different direction. I have the ability to do that.
Yep.
And that is, we don't, that doesn't exist in government,
Yeah.
right? And so I think there's a multi-pronged approach to this. I think my personal belief is we can make the most inroads by creating better trained and qualified instructors, because they have the maximum amount of reach to the officers' boots on the ground. But also, we have to start contextualizing the information that we know to be true and operationally correct and advantageous, and presenting that information in a way through academia or other sources that go to the decision makers, that go to the bean counters, that go to the politicians and people that run these different groups and advisory groups. When we explain things to them, it can't be from, Sergeant Bob, who spent 25 years on the street, saying this is, no, literally, this is what we need, I'm telling you because through experience I know this. They don't care.
Yeah.
And so we have to contextualize that information in a way that we go, hey, listen, do you agree on this basic concept? Yes. Great. Now let me explain how this concept relates directly to this part of our training, and how, if we adjust we adjust our approach, not only will it save us in litigation, but it's going to make our officers better. We can serve our communities better. And at the end of the day, because that's what they care about is money, you're going to spend X amount of dollars on training, and it's going to save you X times 10 in potential costs down the road. And so I think there's a multi-pronged approach we have to take. But just like you, I'm about, how do I make the biggest impact now? How do I make officers safer tomorrow? And I think what you're doing in conjunction with what we're doing is really the best approach and the only approach we have right now.
Yeah. There's another space that we started working in when I came on. It was more on the police leadership side and on the training command leadership side. So historically, we were just right there with the instructor level folks, and that's great because that's our core, that's our rabid fan base. We want to over support them there, but they are also getting barriers and challenges trying to push up resources due to budget and stuff. And I get it, like sheriffs and chiefs and colonels, police leaders, it's a real challenge to manage a budget, and most of your budget's people. So then, what do you do with the rest? And there's a lot of things that they're really challenged to do. But one of my good friends and a sales guy who's on my team in 2020, Joe Gautier, he loves to challenge chiefs and sheriffs to go ask for it, because if you go ask city council, county council, or commissions for something that will better improve officer safety, community safety, and stuff like that, and they say no, you asked for it and they said no. And so when something horrible goes wrong and you can attach that, you can connect it to training or resources or whatever, they said no. And so I think that's part of the accountability thing. Everybody's accountable. And certainly we have to be, the cops have to be, but so do the communities. The communities have to be accountable to the success of this thing too. And what we see, like trend over trend over trend, every time something horrible gets like splattered all over national news, who, drives fear. That's how they sell. It's all fear-based TV. When that happens, there's a call out for better training. I got this from a good friend of mine, Antoine Lane, but there's a call out for better training, right? Better training, though, is undefined. And so a chief of police goes to the city council and says, "Yeah, I fired that cop. We're going to do better training." Nobody has any idea what that means. And here's the other part: how do you measure it? So it's usually like a fire and forget initiative after some critical things happen that's horrible and ugly. And there's no measurability over the impact of that for a long period of time. Now, certainly there's exceptions to this where some forward thinking agencies, progressive agencies have implemented programs and measurability KPIs against those programs. So we know that exists, but that ain't the rule. That's an exception, just based on what we see here domestically.
The interesting concept with all of that is we have this, and this is one of the points that I wanted to bring up before, which is the difference between qualifications and training, because those are two
Mhm.
very distinct and different things.
Yep.
And I think people conflate those a lot, and agencies, especially in the firearms realm, it gets messy very, very quickly. Um, but I want to talk about the concept that you just brought up, which is how do we evaluate or how do we determine that learning has occurred? And I think that's one of the biggest misses that we have as a whole. And there's a lot of amazing trainers and a lot of great agencies that understand this concept and are implementing these adult learning principles now, but still the majority, and I would say the vast majority of agencies in the United States and definitely internationally, don't have mechanisms in place, whether it's through academy, in service, or otherwise, to identify whether or not learning has occurred through training or if the officer just attended training. Because right now, they attend the training, they get the check in the box, and from a liabilities perspective, that's all that matters,
That's right.
right? But from a training perspective, did the officer understand the information? Can they contextualize it on their own? Can they utilize it in an operational environment? What is the how long is the retention of that knowledge and usefulness to them? Is it a week after training? Is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? Is it 10 years? Because sometimes we give them training once and they will carry that specific training for their entire 25-year career.
That's right.
So has learning occurred? And I think if collectively, if we can start figuring out how to implement that change, I think we're looking at something extremely positive.
100%. I think like for firearms training at Charlotte, we have a phenomenal range staff, really great tactical teams who invest in us at the patrol level. And what we do, we have this is the state requirement is that you do day and night qual on pistol and shotgun, right? So then what our SWAT team does is they put us through day and night combat as well. And so we get to do a bit of like gunfighting type training, right? And I shouldn't say gunfighting because there's nothing really coming at us unless we do like active shooter training. But you get the principle, like we're actually shooting on the move under a little bit of stress, stuff like that. That is not like, again, I come from a very well resourced agency. We're getting to do more than the state requirement. And I would argue, shit, man, put me through that once a month, not once a year. Put me through that at least once a quarter. And you talk about being able to measure, directly impact outcomes in the street. Holy crap, that's amazing. So I think we're lucky in Charlotte. Now you go to like LAPD, they are just that baseline LAPD officer typically is a very tactically aware human. LAPD's tactical program is pretty solid. Their command control, all that stuff at the street level is pretty well. They decentralized that stuff a long time ago and have seen some pretty good stuff out of it. But again, these aren't rules. These are just well resourced agencies that do this. At a higher level than a lot of agencies. And then you've got like one of my guys comes from New York State. He was at Rochester, Lamar Cousins. He runs all training operations for the Americas, which is you guys, domestic, and then Latin America. And man, they only have to qualify one time. That's in the academy. How insane is that? And I'm not picking on the guys in New York at all. Like phenomenal police officers up there, but think about that. Like, how do you get people if you're not even at least at a state level going to require that they shoot a gun once a year? Man, what is your expectation of outcomes? And
Mhm.
so I think that's whether you do or don't believe in like a national movement or police reform, I think we could all agree, man, wouldn't it be cool if there was a national standard for performance? And then could we then put in measurability into that performance? To your point, how do we know what they're going to do in the field, and when they do it, how can we measure that? So an example for us is when we certify a master instructor and they teach an Axon course. So they'll go out and they teach, got like 200 of these people running around the world. They go out and teach an instructor course for us as a contractor. We send people to QC them in the classroom. So that's a way that we're trying to measure their performance. We do not have that mechanism at the instructor level because the instructors are teaching their cops. And so it's kind of like, now we would, if they said, hey, come in, I just want you guys to watch me teach. We're there. Call us. We'll help you come in, instructor development, whatever you want, and just watch you teach. I won't charge you a dime for that. Like, we're here to help you. Um, but like a lot of agencies, historically, are like, hey man, this is my world. I teach what I want, and that's the area that candidly I'm a little worried about because I just don't have measurability on it. I can't understand what is done with the cops in the classroom. Now we know they follow like our curriculum and our training and that kind of stuff, but just like you mentioned above, how do we know it's sticking and how that's taught? Just because you teach it on a PowerPoint doesn't mean it actually changes behavior. So how do you measure that? That's an area I worry about a little bit.
Yeah, well, hopefully, and this will be a ongoing conversation with our instructor development program that we're building, because I'd love to have in-depth conversations with you, and maybe there's some synergy there, um, to address some of that, because that's kind of exactly what the program is designed for. It's designed for instructors that go to an instructor program, they go back to their agency, and it's the now what, right?
Yep.
We want to develop a community, a network, a program where they always have somewhere to go back to ask questions, to continue ongoing training, to stay up to date on all of the core adult learning principles and scientifically backed practices that we know to be true, right? So that even if they're given something, thrown a curveball by their department saying, hey, you have to train this now, or hey, you have to change this, they have the ability to ask for help in doing that, which I think is another big thing with instructors. I know it was with me when I first started training. You have a pretty inflated ego when you first train those first couple courses, and you're like, I know what I need to know. Like, I'm good. Like, let's get it going. And then it takes a little while to realize you don't know shit. Like, it takes a little while, right?
Mhm.
And so hopefully we can do is create that, it's kind of a culture shift if you think about it, right? It's what is the mindset that we're instilling in new instructors, whether they're new taser instructors, or they're a use of force, or an academy instructor, or they're in service, or they're teaching I, or they're teaching, vehicle interdiction, or it doesn't matter. What are we instilling in those instructors so that they know that I can always go to these people for assistance, because I may not know everything I need to. Or at least, hey, or you know what's even better? Have your idea, have your concept and your training delivery down, and then go get it double checked by somebody, and they may give you like, hey man, this is 100%, this is good to go. And now you have that benefit of being like, my gut was right, I know what I'm doing. And now that confidence, right? It's that confidence competence loop. Your competence increases your confidence, and a confident instructor who's competent in the information that they're instructing in, that academy class, that officer that's attending that training is by far and large going to take a lot more out of that class than an instructor who's sitting there kind of questioning what they're teaching. And I think that's a whole nother super deep rabbit hole to go down, but I think that'd be really cool to start changing the culture a bit in that realm.
Yeah, 100%. Like I think we as a law enforcement instructor culture tend to get a little protective of our own programs, which is good because that demonstrates ownership, right? Like people want to own what they're doing, and I think that's phenomenal. I think the area of growth for this profession, specifically on the instructor side, is come tell me when I'm not doing well, right? come challenge me on the things areas I need to grow, like the gaps that I have either personally on how I deliver it or how I'm holding the students to accountable for the lessons we taught them. That one connection point. I'm excited to work with you closer on this because that one connection point from the instructor level to the student is a gap area for us at the company, and I'd love to figure that out. I will say too, um, we continue to bring in just some phenomenal talent into our organization. People coming out of either policing or military, and we're recruiting like crazy. And one area we wanted to grow was on the tactical side. So historically, we've only been teaching that instructor or master instructor level. We're changing that in 2023, and we're getting into um, two different courses. We're getting into um, a patrol combat course. I don't know if we'll exactly name it that, but it's more of like really dynamic, fast moving patrol based course that encompasses the taser in a very special way, right? It's not a taser, like specifically a taser course. We'll incorporate all kinds of different threat levels in there. So, because you know as well as I do, you tell people to come to taser training, their mindset is taser training. We don't want to create that environment. The second one is for the special operations community in law enforcement, like the SWAT guys, what to do with these devices in the stack. And there's may or may not be some future stuff we're working on that may or may not happen at TASERCON that we want to talk about. And so we're kind of preparing for that more officer direct level training at the tactical with these tactical experiences. And it's part mindset, part operation ability. So pretty
Yeah.
pumped about those.
Yeah, that sounds really cool, and it actually brings me to a point, kind of a segue, but this is, and I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this, and people would be questioning me if I didn't ask you this. So I apologize for the question before I ask it.
Okay.
But this is something that you had clarified for me in our one-on-one conversation, and I think that this is a great platform to get this out there because it helped a lot in my understanding, and I think in a very short way, in a very short form, it's going to help a lot of people listening to this understand a bit better. And the question is this, and this is what we had talked about, was it's been very widely known, Rick's idea to eliminate the bullet, right? And because of lack of knowledge on my part, of my assumption was, well, that by eliminating the bullet means we eliminate projectile weapons like handguns, and therefore, like, we want our officers not to use their handguns. And
Right.
so you had a very short, succinct explanation of that, and I'd love to give you the opportunity to share that because I think this is a great place to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for that question, Adam. If you ever come across Rick Smith, um, he's absolutely the real deal. He's one of the most genuine people I've ever met in my life. Um, if he was as operationally relevant as he is brains, he would be one of the most dangerous human beings you'd ever meet in your life. But a phenomenal talent, a phenomenal leader. And if you don't know the Taser origin story, he did this. He built the Taser or what it is now today because his best friends were murdered. And the way he thinks about obsoleting the bullet is not about taking guns away. It's about building a better device. And so if you think about the two modalities or the two outcomes of like an officer taking a life and a person losing the life, that's where Rick's focused. He's like, how do we help the cops? How do we give them a weapon platform that doesn't kill, that's better than a gun? How do we do that? Right? Because Adam, we all know, like, we got cops and military guys that go through a ton of shootings, kill numerous people, have zero problem with their life. And we know people that shoot one or see even a dead body, and it completely changes their how they can live and be and work and all that stuff. So it's not mutual. Meaning, like, if you have to take a life in law enforcement, some people have zero problems, at least manifested, and some people it ruins their career, ruins their lives. So, number one, how do we give cops a better weapon, a weapon that doesn't kill but can outperform a gun. So that's something that Rick's in pursuit of, right? And it doesn't mean taking guns. Like, gun is the most efficient way of stopping a threat today. Period. We have not accomplished that as a taser. Like, it just hasn't happened. But what if it did? What if a taser had as many rounds as a pistol? How does that change things? I can tell you one thing it does is it means likely that we don't have police use of force where a taser was used and then there is a essentially an escalation to lethal because the taser was ineffective. That's how that changes things. And so we've had a ton of that, right? Kenosha, we've had Baton Rouge, we've had Atlanta, like all these things that made national news over the last 36 months. Those were all escalation to lethal platforms because the taser was ineffective. And it doesn't mean the taser didn't work, right? If you pull the trigger on a taser and you miss, it's just like missing with a gun. The taser worked just fine. You just missed. But how do we develop platforms where you don't miss anymore? And you have more than two trigger pulls to deliver a less than lethal round that stops someone. That's where we're obsessed right now, is how do we deliver that to the world? So I would say keep your seatbelts on because some big awesome shit's getting ready to happen. So the other thing I would say is um, it has nothing to do with taking guns from anyone. There's not a person at the company that works on this problem, including Rick, that is talking about taking guns and being behind an initiative to take guns off the street from cops or anyone for that matter. That is not a conversation that exists. So if anybody has any anxiety about that, I'll just put that to bed right now. Nobody's talking about that. I've got 3 ARs, a couple of pistols. Most of my guys do. We love hobby shooting and building optics and doing that stuff. There's a ton of people at the company that are into that. So it has nothing to do with that. It's literally how do we deliver a better weapons platform that gives you multiple options, multiple chances, and you don't have to kill somebody. I think that would be what everybody wants. Like, not to kill somebody. If I could stop somebody, not kill them, even if they're you know a bad person or whatever, I think that would be an opportunity everybody could get behind. So that's really what we're talking about.
Thank you for explaining that. And it's really interesting because I think we all agree there's some situations where some people just need to be made unalived. like, and those are still going to exist. We know that.
Yeah.
But to tie back into the beginning part of our conversation with TaserCon and the focus on officer mental health, again, we've lost so many officers to suicide in the last few years, um, that I think that's a part of this that people miss, right? Or they have missed in the past. But now with that explanation, it's saying if I can prevent an officer from having to take a life and allowing our justice system, as stupid as their justice system has been in the US, Canada, and everywhere over the last little while, but allow that to do its work. But so that individual officer doesn't have to take that burden onto their own shoulders. I think that is a crucial component. And that was that when you explained that to me the first time, that was the shift that I had. Was it's not about saying that sometimes we're going to need to do what we need to do. That's just that when you sign up and you go to work, that's just a reality of our lives.
Yep.
But if we can prevent that from having to happen, if we can give the officer a resource that's just if not more reliable, that is just if not more effective, and prevents them from having to end someone's life and deal with the consequences of that, from an emotional, from a litigious position, from everything, then that is a benefit to the entire law enforcement profession. And that's what I think I wanted to just share with people on this podcast because I think it's critically important.
Yeah. And thanks for asking that question. I love when people challenge us on those things and just, hey, help me understand this better. This is what I heard. These are things we want to talk about with customers. When you shoot somebody in a law enforcement capacity, I think we we need to remember that we're in some states we're charged as a homicide suspect, and the DA's office prosecutor's office has to justify it. But what happens at the scene? They take our gun, they put us in a patrol car, they pull us away from our team, they put us in a homicide interview or an interview room by ourselves until somebody comes and talks to us. That's what happens. So mentally, what does that start to do to people? And yeah, you can have peers and you call your attorney and do all those things because and those are great, but the process of which you go through that is pretty horrible, man. It's horrible, and I'm not saying it's not needed. I'm just saying it's a shitty experience. I was just talking to, I don't know if you know Juan Perez. He's a former director of Miami-Dade Police Department. Freddie Ramirez, the current director of Miami-Dade Police Department, like lifelong friends of mine, good dudes. And I was talking about to JP this morning about the officer wellness on this police shooting stuff. He's like, dude, his SWAT guys, a lot of his tactical guys, they just started to see this trend. Done so much serious work, and it's Miami-Dade, man. It ain't, it ain't Beverly Hills. Nothing against Beverly Hills Police Departments. I know they do some great work. I'm just talking about their contact work with the violent community. They started to see a really bad trend with some of their tactical operators where they're drinking a lot and and like domestics, like all kinds of stuff. And so they had to put in some really strong mechanisms to start to curb that. And I think that's a product of having to do that job. But the thing is, nobody's special in the police department, right? You can be an administrative sergeant, go out to drive to get gas in your patrol car and get in a shooting. You're going to have the same thing to go through as a SWAT operator. So how do we develop things for everyone who go through these? And by the way, it's not just guns and shooting people. I mean, we have to deal with so much death and destruction too, and that affects people. And so it's kind of like this holistic view of how can we help law enforcement start dealing with this stuff. Like trauma's crazy, man. We have a job to go out to the world and deliver great police service, and we have to put our big boy and big girl hats on and put up our shields and be able to function and operate in that capacity after leaving, seeing a dead baby or a person burned alive or a rape victim or something like it. This stuff compounds over time, and what we know about trauma in our brains is we file that stuff away incorrectly, right? And then it pops out one day, and we're like, "Oh my God, why am I thinking about putting a gun to my head? That's crazy." And so this is just something we're obsessed about. We want to figure out some good solutions and mechanisms for.
Yeah, I mean, and that's right in line with our mission here with ILET as well. Like, not only do we want to make better training and better trainers, but how do we prevent how do we help officers and save officers, right? And it's not just saving officers from losing critical engagements and fights on the street, but after those occur, or even after their career is over, how do we help them at that point?
Yeah.
And I think that is it's so cool to hear that that is a direction that Axon is taking. I mean, we've been involved with it from the beginning, and even this year we have so many components in our ILET summit this year on mental health. We have new partners like Heck Trauma Institute. We have Dr. Catherine Hamill who's going to come in and speak. We have um, Jason Harney, who's a former LV Metro officer who just put a documentary out called Wrist Lock. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No,
Um,
no. Huh.
I'll send after this. We'll talk offline. But
Yeah.
he did a few years ago. He did a documentary called The Wounded Blue, and from that spurred a nonprofit charity organization to assist wounded and injured police officers. And so all of these things we're going to be showcasing all of the different components from injury to critical incident recovery, addictions counseling and things like that, because we know like that's prevalent in our industry. There's so many things that we can touch on that they don't have to be official things, right? We don't have to have an officer sit in an in service and watch 2 hour have a instructor come into a 2 hour PowerPoint on here's why being addicted to drugs and alcohol is bad.
Yeah.
That doesn't help anybody,
Nope.
right? But here's an hour of something you can take on your own. You can watch it, you can absorb it, you can take contextually whatever you want out of it, and then here's a bunch of resources to seek out afterwards if you need, or some contact points if you need. But there's nothing on record. The agency doesn't need to know about it. Your department doesn't need to know about it. Your peers don't need to know about it. this is for you. And I think if we start taking those approaches and treating officers as individuals, not as badge numbers, I think we're going to be a lot more successful in that endeavor across the board.
100%. When I did our opening, I usually do our opening at master instructor schools, and we were in Vegas and Charlotte last year. Again, we're going to be actually master instructor will kind of be embedded at TASERCon as well. So if you're coming to master instructor school in Vegas, you're going to get access to some of the TASERCon stuff. It's going to be super cool. But I opened up and talked about um, really the life of an officer and an instructor, the impacts they make. And one slide I put together was you're putting yourself last. And it's so true, man. Like protectors and warriors and guardians, like whichever term you want to use for whatever they're doing, like it's true. At work, at home, people are not taking care of themselves. And I think it's one where you just need to surface that stuff and talk about it. And ultimately, like it's across wellness, vitality, and depression and suicide. Like, for those of you who are on the listen to the podcast, if you don't know, ambushes and bad guys are not killing cops nearly as much as suicide and heart attacks. If you don't take care of your body, you don't take care of your mind, you're at risk. And it just can happen overnight. So those are things that we're excited to surface and resource as best as we can at the company.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm so excited. I'm excited for the conference. Obviously, I'm lucky. I'm stacking Shot Show with that as well, and getting to. You guys are going to be down at Shot Show. I have no doubt you're going to be set up
Yep.
there. I'm
We'll be
assuming.
there.
So we'll have chances to interact there. Obviously, with the summit, I'm obviously going to cut out some time to come in and observe your master instructor program as well, and see what your trainers are doing, and just how well it's received by the students that are on it, because you have quite a few people coming down there to take that program, and that's exciting to see. That program is getting larger and larger, which is always great. And last thing, yeah, if anybody's listening to this and you want to check out or get check out TaserCon and all that kind of stuff. Links are going to be below in the show notes. Obviously, up here, you've seen the tasercon.com website. You can check that out. Or, as always, you can reach out to me directly, and we'll make sure Andy's contact is going to be available to you through his LinkedIn or through Axon, so you guys can get a hold of him. Andy, before we wrap things up here, brother, I always give people the chance. Is there anything that you want to leave officers or trainers listening to this? Like, what is top of mind for you right now that you just want to get out there?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say is being in the private sector, actually living both lives for the last almost a decade, still part police officer and over in the private sector at the company. I would tell people I get the privilege to get a higher view about what's going on in the world. And for those who are listening to this who think that there's no end in sight and cops are not cared for or recognized in things, that is the media telling you a fictitious story. Go sit down in a coffee shop, have a conversation with people in your community, talk to people. It's kind of like the politics right now in America. Like the reality is we're much more connected than the media would tell us. I'm not just picking on the media, like it's the business of the media. But the reality is there are people who care about you, your community cares about you. We're kind of all in this together. And our company is behind you 120%. Anything that I can do for you personally, or we can do to support you better in your programs and your police officers, please let us know. We're happy to lean in and excited to work with you.
Awesome, brother. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm excited for this new partnership opportunity with Axon and ILET, and hopefully we can make some massive progress in the industry with that. And looking forward to seeing you in Vegas. So we'll talk to you then.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
Absolutely.